Hello, everybody, and welcome back to today's episode of Crafting with Martha Stewart. Today we'll be talking about how the government can interfere in market equilibrium. So from the previous videos, we saw that our markets tend to adjust to all sorts of different changes that can happen. And in the first video we talked about how if for some reason you're out of equilibrium, both on the consumer and the producer side, people will tend to push towards the point of equilibrium. So what we're going to look at today is what happens if outside forces, so in this case we're going to be talking about the government, imposes different changes or restrictions on the market and how that affects people. So we're going to do a couple definitions and we're going to go through a couple examples here. So we're going to be talking a lot about price ceilings, price floors, and then eventually taxes. So I want to do some definitions to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. So a price ceiling. So when the government imposes a price ceiling, that is saying the price is not allowed to be above a certain amount. So price ceiling, can't charge above a set amount. So if the government set a price ceiling of $30, nobody would be allowed to charge more than $30. A price floor, here, a price floor means you cannot charge below a certain amount. So price floor, can't charge, that's not how you spell charge, below that amount. So if the government imposed a price floor of $30, that would mean that you would not be allowed to sell this good for less than $30. Okay, so we're going to look at what happens to the market when the government imposes all these different changes. There's one slide per part, so let's go ahead and get started with part A. Okay, so in this scenario, we have an initial market equilibrium as shown in this graph. The initial equilibrium price is right here. Each of these lines is 5, so this looks like it's about $33. Okay, so the initial market price is $33. What happens if the government comes in and imposes a price ceiling of $40? So the government's going to come in and say, all right, right here at $40, ooh, sorry, it's a very messy line. You are not allowed to charge more than $40. So this would actually have no impact on anybody because the market price is already below the ceiling. It's $33. People are like, okay, I'm not allowed to charge more than $40. That's fine. We're all happy here at $33. So this is an example of a non-binding ceiling. So this happens when the market price, so what the market's doing without any interference, is already below the ceiling set by the government. Government. So if the government came in and said, hey, you can't charge more than $40, everybody would be like, cool, we weren't going to anyway. And this would affect nothing. So that's an easy case. All right, so part B says the government imposes a price ceiling of $25. So here's $25. Make a better line this time. Okay, so this actually is binding because, as we said before, the market price that wants to exist is $33. And the government comes in and says, no way, you're not allowed to charge that much. The maximum that you can charge is $25 for this good. So at a market price of $25, producers only want to supply 20 units. So if you look at this, they're like, oh, well, if I can't get $33, I'm going to reduce my output. And now instead of producing the original amount, we only want to produce 20 units. So suppliers only want to offer 20 units. Consumers, on the other hand, are like, cool, this thing just got cheaper. I was paying $33 for this, and now I only have to pay $25. So consumers at $25 would demand 50 units, right? So what happens is that there is a market shortage because consumers want 50 units. Suppliers are only willing to produce 20 units. So there's a shortage of 30 units, which is a huge bummer. So we can go ahead and take a look at what would happen with the different surpluses. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so when we look at consumer surplus, I want to shade in what the original consumer surplus was. So at the original market price, consumer surplus is everything under the demand curve but above the price. Okay, so the original consumer surplus is that blue triangle. After the price ceiling is imposed, consumer surplus is still going to be everything under the demand curve but above the price line. So the new quantity is only 20 units, and the area underneath the demand curve but above the price line is this trapezoid right here. So this is the new producer surplus, this green trapezoid here. Okay, we've lost this little triangle. I want the highlighter. We lost this triangle right here. That's disappeared. Okay, so let's look at the producer side. On the producer side, the original producer surplus was the area underneath the original price, but above the supply curve. So it was this triangle. Okay. Under the new price ceiling, producer surplus is the area underneath the new price line, so $25, but above the supply curve. So it's now this yellow triangle. All right. So producer surplus has gotten smaller. Notice, again, we lost one piece of area, this triangle right in here. Okay. So when you look at the three sections over on the left, what the price ceiling did is it transferred a block of surplus. So if we look at this square, this rectangle right in here, this square of rectangle used to belong to producers, right? So if you look at the original producer surplus, which was this whole triangle, slide back down. This portion was transferred from producers to consumers. So this shows how a price ceiling that's binding is great for consumers because they are able to get a product at a lower price than they were paying before. Not so great for the producers. However, when we look at the economy as a whole, as long as it doesn't really matter whether the producers have the surplus or the consumers have the surplus, as long as somebody is receiving it, then on net, when we look at the entire economy, there haven't been any losses. So while this change transferred more surplus to consumers, that's not necessarily bad or good. That surplus just changed hands. So the issue is with these two triangles over here. So right here. These two pieces of area were lost. The blue triangle was lost by consumers, and it was not transferred to anybody. It was just lost. The pink triangle was taken from producers, and it was also not transferred to anybody else. So this combined triangle over here, the pink and the blue combined, this is a very famous area in economics. This is called deadweight loss. So deadweight loss represents surplus that is not transferred from one group in the economy to another. It's just value in the economy and surplus that just disappears after there's some sort of interference in the market. So in this example, the change in consumer surplus, depending on the exact shape, consumers might be better off or worse off. In one hand, they're worse off because the quantity exchanged is decreased. On the other hand, they might be better off because the price has gone down. So there are two different things that are working in different directions for the consumer. For the producer, this is bad. They're at a lower price and a lower quantity. That's not good for them. But more importantly is the economy has lost out on this deadweight loss triangle. So that's a really important thing to notice when we're doing these problems, is to watch out for when we see deadweight loss. Okay, so let's see if we have time to start the next one. Okay, so yeah, I think we have time for this one. So here's our initial equilibrium. The price is $33. And here the government, nope, we're not going to have time for this. I'll start this problem on the next video. Talk to you in a few minutes.